Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of 6 for 6. We have reached season 4, episode 14, ladies and gentlemen. We've been having a fantastic clip of episodes of just getting by with our perfect record of 500. 3 for 3, ladies and gentlemen. We are just knocking that out of the park for an average so well that you probably don't even know that how well that looks. In terms of baseball that just recently wrapped up in the World Series, batting 500 looks beautiful. So if that was our case, we would be assigned for a big contract. But that doesn't help us when you're trying to pick games and trying to get that correctly, because the more correct games you get picked, the more credible your sources and takes become. So that changes our overall record this year, ladies and gentlemen, to 43, 33, and 1. So a nice, good, solid record across the board. Can't really complain too much about it, but as we have a couple more weeks left in our 6 for 6 season, we're going to start to shift more towards the new year and revealing, our March Madness selection, our college basketball, NBA, WNBA is more in the summer, but you have the World Cup coming up. So you have all those games happening all at once. So a lot of good games that we got coming up in 2026. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get the show on the road for this week of week 11, I believe, of the college football season. Let me confirm that. But ladies and gentlemen, this week should have been an interesting week if teams performed to their status quo. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is week 11 of the college football season. So what I meant by games that should have been their status quo, we could have more ranked matchups than what they are this week and more playoff implications, but it's not looking like that. For example, in our number 6 slot, LSU, Alabama, who's number 4 in the nation. Ladies and gentlemen, this game is Saturday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 p.m. Pacific Time on ABC. This should have been a top 5 matchup, but LSU has blundered to Vanderbilt, A&M, Ole Miss, just not looking great. Where Alabama has turned it around from the start of the season and just has been marching forward. Now, if we're looking at a common eye test, there's some coaching stuff of Brian Kelly in the mix with South Carolina and Vanderbilt and all that stuff. But if we're looking at the team's capability, they beat South Carolina by 10 points, where Alabama beat South Carolina by 9. But when you change the head coaching and your coaching tree, that kind of starts to unravel when you start looking at A&M when it was 49-25. So that's going to be the telltale of this LSU team. I think their chances of college football have been dashed. Their 3 losses, they're done. So they're trying to spoil Alabama's season, but I think the tie is still going to roll on strong with an 8% chance of victory. Give me Alabama to win this matchup. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, in the 5th slot, again, what could have been Navy versus Notre Dame, who's number 10 in the nation. Saturday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 p.m. Pacific Time on NBC. Ladies and gentlemen, even though Navy has been 7-1 this season, they really haven't been beating teams convincingly. Every game has been close with Air Force, Temple, and losing to Northern Texas State, Texas, I should say. And Notre Dame has been rolling ever since their loss earlier, but they have been taking care of business as they go through. I like Notre Dame in this one. I don't think anyone's going to say this is a bad pick. So give me Notre Dame to beat Navy in this scenario. Saturday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 p.m. Pacific Time on NBC. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, in the 4th slot, number 2, Indiana. Again, Penn State should have been better, but they fell apart and just been on a losing streak since. They just haven't turned it around. They just been on a 5-game losing streak, and their season's done. They're just trying to keep bowl eligibility, but I think Indiana's about to put that almost a nail in a coffin, given them the 6th loss. Even though it's in Penn State, I can see Indiana struggling, but it's not going to be a sellout crowd. The fans are done with the season. Penn State's moving on to the next season and rebuilding. So give Indiana the solid victory over Penn State so you can catch Indiana number 2 in the nation versus Penn State Saturday, noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time on Fox. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're getting to the games where that have playoff implication to start eliminating teams. First up in the third slot, ladies and gentlemen, we have Texas A&M, who's the third team in the nation, versus Missouri, who's number 22. Missouri's hopes are kind of dashed, being 2-2 in the SEC. So that kind of helps them, kind of eliminates them from the SEC title game with the amount of games that we have left. But, ladies and gentlemen, they're going to go around trying to spoil people's season. Going with a 2-loss season for Missouri right now looks pretty good going 10-2. Maybe they can get some help in slipping in, but they need a lot of help. And knocking off number 3, A&M, is a step in the right direction. A&M's offense has been clicking, has been driving, but their defense can get things in a hairy situation like when they played Arkansas. But their offense will find a way to outpace them and beat them relatively convincingly, even though Missouri has a good defense here and there, keeping teams close. But, I mean, looking at the Auburn victory, taking them to overtime, it's going to be an interesting game. If Missouri's defense can show up and keep A&M's offense at bay, we got a ball game in our hands, ladies and gentlemen. And it's a 3:30 p.m. kickoff. You just can't get better than that. So I'm going to still go with A&M in this matchup, but it's going to be a close one. You can catch Texas A&M, number 3 in the nation, versus number 22, Missouri, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 12:30 p.m. Pacific Time on ABC. Oh no. Well, it looks like we lost connection, but we're going to still try to press on, ladies and gentlemen. Brief momentarily as we bring that back. Oh, great. Now we're going to have to restart. And we're coming back. And we're back on live, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for that little mishap. We got a little disconnection of our webcam, but we're back at it. And now we're going to go into our second game of the week. Number 9, Oregon versus number 20, Iowa. The offense that starts to slowly roll but flies high versus the Hawkeyes defense that will just swarm you and bog you down. This is going to be a thrilling matchup in Iowa. Very tough environment for Oregon. Gonna be a very challenging one, but I like Oregon trying to keep their Big Ten hopes alive, even though Iowa is also a one-loss Big Ten team at the moment, even though they have 2 losses of the season. But they have a chance to do something great. They can easily find their way fighting back in the Big Ten championship game if Indiana loses or Ohio State loses at any point in the remaining of the Big Ten season. But I think Oregon is going to find their way to flap their wings and fly higher than the Iowa Hawkeyes and blow them out of the water. But it's still going to be close with Iowa's defense looming large and creating large turnovers and make it very difficult for this Oregon offense. But Oregon will find a way to persevere and get the job done. So you can catch number 9 Oregon versus number 20 Iowa, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 12:30 p.m. Pacific Time on CBS. Let's do a quick recap before we reveal the game of the week. And the 6th slot, ladies and gentlemen, we have LSU versus number 4 Alabama, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 p.m. Pacific Time on ABC, and I have Alabama winning it. Next up, in the 5th slot, we have Navy versus number 10 Notre Dame, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 p.m. Pacific Time on NBC, and I have Notre Dame winning it. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, in the 4th slot, we have number 2 Indiana versus Penn State, noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time on Fox, and I have Indiana winning it. And our 3rd slot, ladies and gentlemen, we have Texas A&M, who's number 3 in the nation, versus number 22 Missouri at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 12:30 p.m. Pacific Time on ABC. And this game's on Saturday, ladies and gentlemen, and I have A&M winning it. And our number 2 slot, ladies and gentlemen, is number 9 Oregon versus number 20 Iowa, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 12:30 p.m. Pacific Time on AC. And I have Oregon wins matchup. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's reveal the game of the week. Game of the week, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be very critical. It's BYU, who's number 7 in the nation, versus Texas Tech, who's number 8 in the nation. Basically a playoff elimination game, but impacts the whole Big 12 championship picture, taking the top 2 teams in. If we're looking like at the eye test, it is the Utah game for BYU when you look at the Utah game against Texas Tech. BYU only won by 3 in a close out fashion, and they were home. But Texas Tech went to Utah and dominated. And volumes and how significant this Texas Tech defense can be, because they held Oklahoma State, I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, to 0 points. And they have ways to make things great out there for this program, where BYU will kind of play it close and be a little scrappy. So their defense is on the weaker side and trying to rely on their offense to get the ball going and keep things close. But I think Texas Tech's defense is going to be better and be able to control BYU at bay. So that's why I like Texas Tech in this matchup. You can catch number 7 BYU versus number 8 Texas Tech, noon Eastern time, 9 a.m. Pacific time on ABC. And I have Texas Tech winning it. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get a quick recap. Get you going out of here so you can enjoy your week 11 of the college football season. And the 6th slot, ladies and gentlemen, we have LSU, Alabama, who's number 4 in the nation, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, 4:30 p.m. Pacific time on ABC. And I have Alabama winning it. 5th slot, ladies and gentlemen, we have Navy versus number 10 Notre Dame, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, 4:30 p.m. Pacific time on NBC, and I have Notre Dame winning it. In our 4th slot, ladies and gentlemen, we have Indiana, who's number 2 in the nation, versus Penn State, noon Eastern time, 9 a.m. Pacific time on Fox, and I have Indiana winning it. In our 3rd slot, ladies and gentlemen, we have Texas A&M, who's number 3 in the nation, versus Missouri, who's number 22. Catch this game on Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, 12:30 p.m. Pacific time on ABC, and I have Texas A&M winning it. Last stop, ladies and gentlemen, our number 2 slot, we have number 9 Oregon versus number 20 Iowa, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, 12:30 p.m. Pacific time on CBS, and I have Oregon winning this matchup. And like I said, the game of the week, ladies and gentlemen, BYU, who's number 7 in the nation, versus Texas Tech, who's number 8 in the nation, noon Eastern time, 9 a.m. Pacific time on ABC. And I have Texas Tech winning this matchup. Last week, ladies and gentlemen, our overall record was 3-3. Hopefully, we get a perfect 6-0 because I like our selection this week. Some very strong picks in our picks to make sure this goes in our favor. And like I said, ladies and gentlemen, our overall record for season 4 is 43, 33, and 1. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of 6 for 6. And we'll catch you here next week for another episode of 6 for 6. So long now. Bye-bye.